How Families and Schools Can Prepare for IEP Meetings with Dr. Rob Kiter, CIRC Program Coordinator, and Alyssa Hollaby, CIRC Program Manager. November 19th, 2025. CIRC's Wisdom Wednesday webinar series.
Thank you for joining us. Today's webinar is about how families and schools can prepare for IEP meetings, hosted by Special Education Resolution Center, or CERC. Today, Alyssa Hollaby, who's the program manager at CERC, and Dr. Rob Kiter, who's the program coordinator at CERC, will be talking through some things that both families and schools can do to help prepare for a successful and collaborative IEP team meeting. I will be monitoring the chat today. So for those of you that are here live, I will be watching that in the Q&A and we'll be asking questions throughout. So just feel free to type in there. So thank you guys. Alyssa, I think that you are starting out if you want to take us away.
Yes, I am. Let me share. All right, here we go. How families and schools can prepare for IEP meetings. Our agenda for today breaks it down into how schools can prepare. That's by building trust, having good intentions and setting goals, setting expectations, and gaining consensus. And then Dr. Rob Kiter is going to address how families can prepare by reducing the cognitive and emotional load, active participation, and unified team perspective. So, ways for schools to be prepared to come into IEP meetings, building trust, those intentions and goals, setting expectations, and gaining consensus, being ready to do all of these things in an IEP meeting is really going to lay some good foundational work for meetings. To build trust, you want to have deliberate outreach when you're talking to parents. Starting your school year off on a good note. When schools are intentional about contacting parents, it's going to build that relationship. It's going to build trust and respect. And the school's first communication with a parent shouldn't be when a child gets in trouble or when it's time for an IEP meeting in January or February. Schools should be deliberately reaching out at the beginning of the year. That could be with a teacher of record newsletter, rotating weekly praise notes, an introduction note with your contact info on it, making yourself available so that parents can feel like they're able to contact you when there's a concern and when there's a need. That is going to go such a long way in building trust and respect, especially if you don't already have a relationship with those parents or if the relationship has been rocky. Deliberately reaching out with good things is going to be a great way to set a foundation. Um, Trust and relationships. So, a common denominator in any good relationship is trust, and trust isn't always automatic. It needs to be built. You have to build those relationships. There's no better time to start building trust than right now. Like I said, sometimes you don't have a relationship, and sometimes it's a rocky relationship. But start doing the things that's going to show families that they can trust you, and what the school is doing for their child. Taking time to build trust is such an important thing. It does take time to build trust, but it can be torn down in a second. So being intentional with your words, your actions, all very, very important things when you're talking about building trust and relationships with families. The foundation of trust is mutual respect. So showing the families that you respect what they have to say, their input. They're the experts on their children, and when you can show them that you respect that, that can turn around and they're gonna have some trust and mutual respect for you as well.
Hey,
One
Alyssa.
of the best. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I want to jump in on that. Just thinking through for those that are here live and those that might be watching the archived recording later, that um, how big of a deal this part is. And we've talked about this a lot, that as the dispute resolution provider for the state, sometimes we're dealing with true issues like IEP issues. Maybe this service isn't being provided, or this evaluation needs to be updated, or whatever the case may be. But so much of it really boils down to this, that the parties either don't feel like they're hearing one another or being heard, and there's that lack of trust. So many of our cases, our phone calls, are really this. This is the issue, is that there isn't a relationship or a trusting partnership. And it just magnifies any other thing that's going on. So I just wanted to kind of point out that this is so huge with every day that we deal with.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Allison, for that. Because it is like it, yeah, it's probably 50 to 75% of the issues. Like there are real issues that need to be addressed, but this is such a huge piece. You are so right. Um, One of the best ways that we show we care about someone is through our willingness to listen to them. And so this just goes right back to what Allison is saying is, when we're showing our willingness to listen, it could um, bring down a lot of the heightened emotions that we're seeing in our day-to-day lives, and schools as well, schools and families. So, oh dear. Uh-oh. There we go. The power of listening. Um, when we listen, when as thinking of a, school perspective, when you're listening, you're not just listening to generate an answer. You're not listening to come up with a solution. You want to listen just to hear what that person has to say. You're not wanting to build an argument or prove a point. Um, you're wanting to hear what that team member is saying, whether it's a colleague, another school member, or a parent. Listening to hear them is such an important thing. To listen for understanding and listening non-defensively is so huge because that comes across in our body language, it comes across in our words and our faces. So it's so important that we are listening for understanding. And others can see that. Others can see when you're listening to prove a point or build an argument, or if you're listening defensively. Parents can see that. Other team members can see it, and it plays such a huge role when in setting the stage and the atmosphere of the room. So it's so important to listen with good intent. Um, And part of doing that, listening with good intent, is active listening because that conveys interest. You can restate and reframe when you listen actively. You can clarify, summarize. Using these four active listening tools, it can go a long way in diffusing situations and clearing up miscommunications that, if someone is taking something incorrectly or the wrong way or misunderstanding, when you're doing active listening, you can avoid some of that later conflict, potentially needing to call circ. If you're able to listen actively and with empathy, it's just these are good practices to have from a school setting so that you can continue to have good communication with your families. Using parent-friendly language. This is another big one. Sometimes parents come into a meeting and they don't quite understand all of the SPED acronyms or the big words or the jargon. And, people in SPED, you live and breathe, all of this stuff. It's what you do every day, but parents don't always understand that. And so using this parent-friendly language continues to build trust for these parents. It reduces stress, promotes collaboration. It gives them the opportunity to give their input because they're understanding what you're saying. And it helps parents to feel like equal team members because they can give their input. So it's so, so important to use parent and to check for understanding as you're going through your IEP meeting. Some ways to do this are slowing down, explaining those acronyms, checking for understanding, and sharing invitations for questions, not just blowing through it because we have to cover this IEP and we have to do it in this amount of time. Give families the opportunity to ask questions and help them to feel open enough to ask those questions.
Hey, Alyssa, sorry, I just, you know how I just process as we go.
Yeah.
Um, I want to say here is this is so important. And I think, sometimes we have to address this with parents as well. When they feel like the school is blowing through stuff, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a purposeful or negative intention because they're also human beings, right? The school professionals who are living and breathing this, and they get in the zone, right? So it has to be really intentional and deliberate to think through, yeah, I've got to get through this procedural task, but we're here talking about a kid And yes, they may really care about that parent and that child and want that partnership, but not have an awareness of how they're approaching that conversation. So I think it's really important that the school teams overall, and I think you might be talking about, coming together prior, but um, feel comfortable maybe helping each other out. Like if the teacher continues to push forward and having another staff member could even go in and help. Hey, let's slow down. Does the parent have any questions on this part? And just more of that deliberate, intentional stuff to make sure that they've got an understanding because so many, even if parents might have questions, don't always feel comfortable asking those. And that's what just another factor that we've heard in these calls when we have people that are frustrated with the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that input. That is so good. I think we are going to cover staffing here in just a second. So I think intentions and goals. So a goal without a plan is just a wish. I like that little meme. Introductions, intentional introductions. When school teams meet, a lot of times people know each other, sometimes they don't. So it's always so important that, especially when school teams, if there's, 5, 6, 7, 8 people, you should always be making the introductions, including your name, your position in the district, and your function in that meeting, because sometimes it's not always clear. And so when you name these three things, it gives a clear understanding for everybody in the room as to what your role in this meeting is, because sometimes those roles can change, right? So being very clear as to why you're there for that child. Some key questions to ensure the introductions are comprehensive. What work are we here to do in today's meeting, and what work do you do with the student? So answering those two questions can go a long way in making a parent feel comfortable with who you are, why you're in their child's meeting, and what the goal of the meeting is. So these are some comprehensive examples. We have one for special education teachers. They write the IEP, collaborate with other team members on provision of services. A student's general ed teacher can give information about what that child is doing in the gen ed setting. How is the IEP helping the student in different situations and settings? Um, a gen ed teacher is great for that purpose. Administrative reps for the district, while they don't normally work directly with the student, they're there to make sure that the child is receiving a free and appropriate public education and being able to help allocate resources if necessary. They're there to give that okay and answer for the district. So those are just some quick examples of how team members could introduce themselves. Varied perspectives. This one is really good for whole IEP teams to remember that everybody comes in with a different perspective on the child. And they have priorities that they want to address with the team. So the parent, I mean, they're the expert on their child. That's the perspective they're bringing, but they're also bringing concerns about if their child is making friends at school or if they're making good progress, or, that's their biggest concerns when they come into a meeting. A SPED teacher might be focused on completing those goals and objectives. Do we need to change goals? Do services need to change? That's the perspective that special ed teacher is bringing. A general ed teacher might be bringing concerns about a student's work in class, if they're not completing work or if there's some behaviors that need to be addressed that's in that setting. They're going to want to discuss that. So everybody who comes into a meeting is going to have a different lens that they see the student through, and it is so very important that everybody has the opportunity to share those perspectives equally. All of these different perspectives are going to have an influence on purpose. All of the perspectives are valid. They all have differing priorities that can influence the direction of meetings and the intentions set for outcomes. And so it's so important that when you start a meeting, you set a mutual purpose. So you lay it out very clearly. What your goal is for that meeting. If you don't always do that, a meeting has the potential to go awry when everybody's not in sync on the expectations and outcomes of the meeting. That mutual purpose will move the group forward. So if you get stuck in one spot, coming back to this mutual purpose will be able to move you guys forward. Okay, setting expectations and versus reality. How many times have we come into a meeting having an expectation that it's going to go one way, and reality is that it goes a very different direction? It happens quite often, I believe. And so when we have these mutual purpose and expectations, it can cut some of that out. Your purpose of meeting is just a short, basic description as to why that team is meeting. It could be a review of existing data. It could be an initial IEP or an eligibility meeting. It could be an IEP addendum, or it could be an FBA and manifestation meeting. Just a short reason written down as to why everybody is meeting so that everybody can refer back to it. And you can also have desired outcomes. What are you wanting to walk away from that meeting with? What do you want to accomplish in that setting in the time frame that you have? And these are two brief statements that you can set on a piece of paper that everybody addresses at the beginning of the meeting that can bring everybody together if things do go awry and keep everybody moving. Um, and when oh, oh, here we go. Yes. Sometimes when you have more than one or two desired outcomes, it could be beneficial to have multiple meetings. So if you have a kiddo that has a lot of needs and this is their initial IEP and you're going to look at eligibility, you're going to look at an IEP, you may be looking at behavior. That's a long time for teams to be sitting there addressing different outcomes. So the team might think about breaking that up into more than one meeting, just so everybody can digest the material and not be overwhelmed.
Alyssa, I think some of this also comes back to that parent-friendly language part too, right? Because some of the stuff you're sharing here, people might think, oh, well, we do this. We send an invitation to meeting. Well, that invitation to meeting might say things like, MEGS meeting. Okay, well, what is that? So again, even in when you gather together and set that mutual purpose, hey, today's the MEGS meeting and what that means is, and explain in that parent-friendly language, and then go into the outcomes because then that talks about not just here's what this word means or this phrase is and what it stands for, but here's what we're going to do with it and what the purpose of it is, right? What outcomes we're going to hit through this meeting. So it's beyond, it's not, doesn't take you an extra half hour. It takes you an extra maybe 3 minutes, but it's beyond just the rote procedural, oh, we sent the invitation that said what we're going to do type of thing. And that helps parents have that understanding of what they're there for. I think this is huge. And I don't know that people think through all of that always as to the power that these small things can do to make such a difference.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And these it's like you said, these are tiny things that teams can do to have such a big impact for the good. Um, and along that line, another one of those things that teams can set up are communication guidelines. CERC has communication guidelines on our website that we would love for you guys to print and share and start using with your teams. But the IEP team is intended to be a collaborative partnership between the school, the parents, other parties that have the goal of working together to make appropriate educational decisions for a student on an IEP. And effective communication is an essential tool in supporting those teams and that collaboration. When guidelines are shared at the beginning of a meeting, they can be referred to when conversation is moving away from dialogue and potentially starting to go south. And this is just a great way to reference back to, if it starts to go sideways, you can say, hey, look, we agreed to these communication guidelines. Let's stick to them. Let's keep moving forward. And here they are. Everyone has an opportunity to share, keeping the focus on the student, keeping the focus on the future, thinking about how to share what you need to say in a way that makes it easier for others to hear, understand, and respond, and then being sure to listen when others are speaking and listening with intent and to hear those people. Following these 5 steps again takes 2 to 3 minutes to share, but can go such a long way in keeping communication open with the IEP team. And keeping the focus where it needs to be on the student and on the future. Sometimes teams can get stuck in the past and what has happened, and this can be a really good way to redirect to we're looking at the future. We're going to move forward. Gaining consensus. Um, Allison talked a little bit ago about some staffing sometimes before meetings and making sure that the school team is together on what they're going to propose. And it is important that schools present a unified front. You know, when you have some team members who are in agreement about one thing and maybe a couple others aren't in agreement, you know, that does not present a united front and can be a very big disruption to IEP meetings. And so school staffings can serve as good opportunities for those school members to develop options to present to the parent based on student needs and appropriate provisions. Disagreement, when respectful and data driven, can be an ethical imperative even among colleagues. And so we want to make sure that we get those disagreements situated before you're presenting to parents. Um, Sometimes others' challenging questions or ideas can broaden creative thinking and problem solving to better meet students' needs and get unstuck from the status quo. And so this internal meeting prep can go a long way in getting the school together on what they're going to present to parents. So and neutralize some of that internal conflict. Allison.
I think that's really important. One thing I do want to address is that sometimes what I've heard when, when parents will call, they feel like, oh, well, the school had a meeting without me. Well, there's a federal regulation in the IDEA that states that these are not IEP meetings. These are preparatory meetings, basically. And the reason, and for people who maybe don't understand that rationale there is, and we've talked about this before, Alyssa, with schools, is that it's only the two parties in a meeting. It's the school and it's the parent, and there's no voting. And that it is helpful for these teams to be unified in what makes the most sense for the child. And trying to do that all in one group with sharing the data in the first place can make that a bit more difficult. And I love the whole that getting unstuck, that status quo thinking part, because sometimes, even though you might not agree fully with your colleague on everything, right, that you have a different perspective of the child, like you shared earlier, and they have another perspective. But coming together and discussing and sharing that as you're talking about ideas that you plan to propose to the parent um, can really actually be helpful because you do have those different perspectives. So coming together with those creative ideas can help brainstorm thinking on how to best serve the student. And I think that's really important. And that just because the school is meant to do that does not mean that they're coming to the parent with, this is what we've decided. That's the difference between, say, a predetermination and an IEP meeting, truly before a meeting, versus that school staffing to have appropriate proposals and having to come together with the data and the ideas. Um, and being willing to hear the parent, of course, like you said, but having that all together of here's what we were thinking to propose to get that good feedback and input from the parent.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So what is consensus? Consensus is a general agreement, something that everybody can live with, support, and implement. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to be 100% happy with what comes, like what the agreement is, but if you can live with it, you can support it, you can move forward with it, that is consensus. Um, so even if it's not the best option, FAPE is considered appropriate. So if it is appropriate for the child, and you can support it, that is what a good consensus is. Agreement to an IEP is dependent on a team decision, not individual votes. That is what Allison was just talking about. If there are 6 school members and 2 parents, that does not mean that there's 8 votes in an IEP meeting. It does. Please don't do that. I hope schools aren't voting. But there are 2 parties in that meeting, the school and the parent. Um, so, and those are the 2 parties that come to consensus. Getting to dialogue and asking questions. Sometimes we just talked about feeling stuck in an IEP meeting, and asking questions can help get you past that stuckness and get you back into dialogue. And so asking the right questions helps uncover important information to help make decisions. So as the IEP team, you know, as you're going through your meetings, ask yourself these questions. Um, really just to catch yourself. So are you being thoughtful when you're talking to families and asking them questions? Why are you asking the questions that you're asking? Is it the right time to ask questions? And what outcome are you wanting from the answer to that question? All of these things are great catches, because sometimes it could be an appropriate question, but if you ask it at the wrong time, it is not going to go well. You might not get the answer you're looking for. So these are just things to really keep in the back of your head and back of your mind as you're going through meetings. And it can help you get past that wall of a breakdown in communication. 7 different types of questions. You have broadening questions, clarifying questions, and explaining questions. Those broadening questions are meant to be encouraging and not threatening. You want that discussion. So it's tell me more, or what else happened, or please share with me. That gets the parents talking, and hopefully you can get to the root of an issue with that. But if you don't, you could then ask clarifying questions. Well, what do you mean by? Or what do you need help understanding? These move from a general idea to very specific, looking for specific answers, and they help you gain understanding. The third type of question is that explaining, and you get an understanding of the respondent's reasoning. Instead of asking why, you could ask what leads you to that conclusion. Um, you know, a parent can sometimes come in and say their child with a learning disability needs a one-on-one para. Well, and if you ask the parent, well, what leads you to that? They might tell you that their kiddo can't do the work, and so that could, as a school, give you an opening to suggest some accommodations or different services, or it opens the lines of communication. So the next two sets of questions are exploring questions, and it helps shift thinking into what is trying to be accomplished. So a question like, what concerns you? What are your concerns? What are you looking for? And then challenging questions can shift in a point of view, also challenge inconsistencies. An example of that is you say you're open to suggestions, but you turn away when I try to talk, or can you explain what's going on? Um, Really, and sometimes when parents go into, and school members as well, it happens on both sides of the table. When they go into that emotional brain, they're not using their rational thinking brain, and these challenging questions can bring them back to that rational thinking, and trying to come up with solutions to move forward. Question types 6 and 7, brainstorming questions. These generate alternative options, develop new ideas, and this is a great way to get people thinking about the future, ways they can move forward. An example, one thing you can do, what's one thing you can do to accomplish that, or how else might this be done? And it really gives parties a way to think together and think collaboratively on ways to move forward for the child. And then consequential questions test reality. They test possible solutions, and they explore a decision's outcome. One example of this is, how does that meet your criteria for fairness, or how might that happen if you do this? Really making people think about what could happen in the realities, and possible consequences of decisions that are going to be made in this meeting. So those are just 7 different types of questions that you can use, to move people forward if you're getting stuck.
I love those, Alyssa, those questions for not only just IEP team meetings with parents, but even if you are having those collaborative discussion within the school team. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced it too, where, yeah, you might not, you're in that status quo. It's like, well, when this kid's in this category, here's the service we do. And another person has a different perspective of, instead of getting that stuck, that even between colleagues, you can get stuck, or kind of like that tennis match of, getting these questions out there can be helpful in all sorts of scenarios, and that prep work too. So I think these are really helpful. And when people get it's so easy to get stuck. And so having these resources to help get you out of that are so helpful.
Yes.
Can I mention one thing? On this, I love this section on questions, and just the big idea about the power of asking questions. I heard someone say, if you don't like the conversation you're having, ask a different question.
I love
Because
that.
it completely changes the direction of the conversation. So there's so many things that asking questions can do.
Mhm.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to share a little bit about the flip side of the coin. How families can prepare for IEP meetings. And really, there are three components. We're going to talk about some things that can help families, help parents reduce the cognitive and mental, emotional load that they feel. Also, some things to help them more actively participate, and then some different concepts that will help you build a more unified team perspective. So we'll start off with the first group. Okay. You can switch it. Okay. Ooh, wow. Okay. I wasn't ready for that. So the first group is reducing cognitive and emotional load. So let's look at the next slide, and we'll start looking at this area. The first thing would be reviewing the IEP. And some of the things that I'm going to share are really going to tie in to what Alyssa was talking about with schools, and hopefully really fit together. So the first one would be for families to really take the time to review the current IEP and ask to receive a draft of the IEP prior to the meeting if you haven't already received one. That can be so helpful. So consider asking the school. If you haven't got one already, maybe a week prior to the meeting, or at least a few days, is there any way I could get a copy of that draft? Because I've seen so many times in meetings, it's very difficult. Back to the parent-friendly language, kind of like to the 10th power, is when an IEP draft is dropped in front of them at that meeting and they haven't had any time to prepare for that. So asking for that can really help, and then reviewing it before you get there. Another thing is share whatever input you have with the school to help them in drafting the IEP and preparing for the meeting. I mean, you're to have meaningful participation. That's what IDEA requires. But if you think about it, meaningful participation doesn't just start at the table of the IEP meeting. It really can start before then. And your input is so important. The family's input regarding what they're seeing, what they see as the students' needs educationally, what's going on. So all of that, please share that input with the team. And then this is a big one that I've found. When you're thinking about getting a draft, I think sometimes families may be under the understanding, it's kind of like what Allison was mentioning about predetermination, but sometimes they think that when they get that draft, the school's already decided what the IEP is going to have. And yet that's really not what's happened. The decisions are not made by the school team in their preparation meeting. That's to help them prepare. The decisions are made when the IEP team deliberates. So that draft is to help everyone on the team be able to have good discussions and deliberate to make decisions. So don't think that, those decisions have already been made. Okay. Another thing to help reduce the cognitive emotional load is really getting clear on your priorities. So take some time to think about what is important to you as a parent, as a family, and what would you like to see accomplished in the meeting. I think sometimes it's easy to just show up in meetings and hope that you really are thinking about those things then, but it will really help to do that in advance. And I think what will also help is prepare a written list of issues that you want to discuss, questions that you want to ask as a parent, and proposals you want to make. So each of those, first of all, what are the things you want to make sure get discussed? What questions you really need an answer from the school on to understand. Again, if understanding is the real goal, what are the questions? And then finally, what are the proposals that you would like to make? Because it's going to be really hard to come up with this right on the spot. You want to take the time in advance. That written list can help you stay focused, stay on track. It also can help de-escalate emotions. So, you might be anxious, emotions may be high, and without a list, you can go off many different directions. That list can keep you on track and help de-escalate. And then once again, think about sharing your list with the school ahead of the meeting. Because what that can do is that could help them when they're planning the agenda for the meeting. They know now, okay, this is going to be really important. Just to give you an illustration of that, it's always the parent in an IEP meeting always has the opportunity to share their concerns. So there's a place for parent concerns, but so they can come out in the meeting. But it would be great if the school knew about a few of those concerns before the meeting, because they could even be thinking about those things. And then they would also hopefully make sure that we did address those concerns during the meeting. So
I want to jump in here.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think this ties so perfectly with what Alyssa had mentioned before regarding the from the school perspective of listening to understand and non-defensively, because this really does, and we've heard this from parents too, who we recently had at a presentation, a parent came up afterwards and was like, I do this so that, yes, so that I don't get emotional during the meeting. This is my work beforehand. But I also have heard where schools will feel like, oh gosh, the parents come in with all these things. It's not about them being more upset or them coming at you, right? It's about their own prep work and their own ability. Just like school team members have got to get together to be unified, this is the parents' prep work. And so I think that goes so well with the school also being able to hear and see that this is not they don't need to be defensive about this. This is the way that might be helpful for the parent to be able to meaningfully participate. And that's whatever prep work they need to do to get to the table and feel like they're a fully functioning member of that team.
Yeah.
So I think that's huge.
Yeah, that really is. I mean, it really is just about what's truly important to them. And yeah, going for the goal of understanding. That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Another thing, getting our expectations together. So, and one that I found that could be helpful, again, this is for families, for parents to think about, is to ask the school if there is an expectation regarding a time frame for the meeting. We know the meeting's starting at 9 o'clock. Is there an expected time frame? Hour and a half, 2 hours? Well, it could be anything. But being on the same page about the meeting time frame can help everyone make sure, first of all, that there's enough time for adequate discussion and deliberation. And then the other thing is this: we all know what it feels like when we have a certain expectation and that expectation is dashed. It's very frustrating where for instance, if the school team, and nothing's been shared at all, but if the school team basically has an expectation that we're going to be here for an hour or an hour and 15 minutes, and yet the parent has an unspoken expectation that we're going to be here as long as it takes. Well, somebody's going to be really frustrated at the end of that meeting, and it could be alleviated by just knowing that. So just ask. If there isn't one, at least you've asked. And then finally, communicate with the school in advance of the meeting to let them know, kind of goes right back to what Alyssa was saying, to let them know what you would like to see accomplished or addressed in the meeting. Maybe you can do that at the beginning of the meeting. I really like that approach you had, Alyssa. I'd never really heard of that, kind of answering those two questions. But even if you don't do that, I think parents could ahead of time say, hey, not just, these are the questions I want to ask. These are the concerns I have. But this is really what I'd like to see accomplished. That could help everyone. And it's kind of back to the priorities thing again, but communicating it with the school. Okay. Early arrival. Really try to make plans to arrive a little bit early for the meeting so that you can get ready to participate without feeling rushed. And I know this is just so practical. You might even think, why even say this? But in reality, coming into a meeting can produce some anxiety, even if there isn't conflict, right? And so if you already know that may be the case, getting there a little bit ahead of time where you can maybe sit in the parking lot for 5 minutes and just gather your thoughts and catch your breath and go in and get a drink of water and not have to rush. That could actually be something that could reduce possibly the cognitive and emotional load that you have. Okay. Communication considerations. This is going to go back and really tie in with what Alyssa talked about on communication guidelines. But as a family, as parents, be prepared to share your thoughts with the team, because those thoughts are important, but try to do it in a way that's both honest and respectful. In the training we provide, Crucial Conversations, they talk about not making the fool's choice. And really all the fool's choice is either thinking that I can either be honest or I can be respectful, but I can't be both. So if you go down only one of those roads, being honest to the nth degree or respectful only, it's not going to lead to a good place. You want to be able to be comfortable enough to be honest and respectful. And so that second, or actually fourth guideline that was mentioned earlier says, think about how to share what you need to say in a way that makes it easier for others to hear, understand, and respond to. And I like the word easier because it doesn't always make it easy, but it can make it easier. And so all this is really saying is it's really not just what we say, but very much the way that we say it that makes a difference. The way we frame our words, the tone of voice we have, our body language, all of that. So think about when something's important to you, how can I share this in a way that they can hear it, they can understand it, and it's not going to put them off and make them defensive. It's going to invite them to engage with me and interact. And then finally, mutual respect, which was talked about earlier, between the team members, it really can go a long way to helping everybody stay engaged and not go on the defensive. So communication, such a big part. Okay. So those are some of the things to think about regarding reducing the cognitive and emotional load. The second piece of this is really active participation. How can you more actively participate as a meaningful member on the team? The first thing I want to just talk about is owning your voice as a parent. Just remember, your voice is important. So you want to be careful allowing someone to speak for you. Some of you as parents, may have an advocate helping to support you, helping to support your child regarding their education. And advocates, I've worked with so many times over the years, they can be so beneficial. Some of the ways that they can help parents would be, first of all, they can help educate you about the special education process, about procedural safeguards, that even though the school is giving all that information out, they probably don't have the time to explain all of that. Advocates can help with that. They can help you clarify. And we talked about earlier about priorities. Well, they can help you clarify and prioritize and also articulate your concerns, your needs, and your vision for your child's education and future. So they can really help prepare you to participate effectively in IEP meetings. They also can help ensure the parent gathers the necessary information to be fully informed and be able to participate in problem solving and feeling like they're really an equal partner. And the last thing is good advocates can model collaborative problem solving skills, which can help you as a parent, but also can help everyone on the team. So I want to be really clear. Advocates can help in many, many ways, but I'm saying that under the larger point that don't give away your voice. Your voice is important. Let's go to the next slide here. So with that, in terms of owning your voice, advocates can be collaborative or they can be combative. In other words, they can help support the team as allies, or they can kind of have an adversarial mentality. And basically what I mean by that is, advocates are obviously going to support you and support your child regarding their education. But Collaborative advocates are also really trying to support the work of the team, the whole team in working together. Combative or adversarial advocates are, maybe they're supporting you, but they're almost coming with the mentality of being against the school team. And so it's really important who your advocate is, that they are a collaborative minded advocate. But even if they are, they can't replace the parent. And so just think about this. The advocate is there to assist you to better meaningfully participate, but without taking away your voice or assuming your role. Nobody can do that. You are the expert regarding your child. So I just want to encourage you, as parents, to own your voice as you exercise your right to provide input that the school team really needs, the IEP team needs your input. And as you ask questions about your child's educational needs.
Hey, Rob.
Uh-huh.
I think another, and I love this piece of this, because you're right. There's again another, it's also goes along with kind of the cognitive emotional load. Sometimes that advocate can help reduce that for the parent too, right? It kind of all goes together and they can be really, really helpful and empowering. But I mean, we've seen this is that if you have an advocate that's very, very adversarial, when it may not be necessary to do so, that school is going to end up shutting that person down, because the IDEA affords and requires meaningful parental participation, like you've said, and they can bring guests, but that advocate is not a member of that IEP team. And that team is supposed to be including all those required and pertinent team members for the child. And you're right, that parent's voice is what's important. And a lot of times the school team members will end up redirecting that conversation right back to the parent because they're that required team member. And so it is so vital, that they're able to participate and get their meaning out, and also make that ultimate, make the decision for what they will agree or not agree to, because that advocate isn't the one raising that child and isn't the one going to be affected by those decisions after the fact. It's the parent and that family and that child. So I love this component of that.
Really true. Thank you for sharing those. Those are some really good aspects to think about regarding advocates and owning your voice as a parent. Yeah, thanks. Okay, I think that's it on that. Okay, another thing that can help as far as actively participating, and this is going to go, some of this is going to be a repeat, and I think it's really good, though, to hear it again because it's true for the school team, it's true for the parents, and that is listen for understanding. So be willing to listen and carefully consider ideas and possible solutions from other team members. In other words, be open to what the team might be bringing. When you listen, your goal, and this was said before, isn't to come up with answers or build your argument. When I'm sharing that fifth communication guideline about listening for understanding, that's what I say. And I mean this, that we all know that it's human nature that we listen to come up with the answer, right? We listen to respond, and we listen to build our argument because confirmation bias will give us the energy to do that. We'll always be hearing those kinds of things. But what we're talking about here is really a deeper level of listening for understanding, not to agree or disagree, but to understand. And so the goal is really, what is that person saying? Where are they coming from? What is their perspective? Because that can really make a difference and it can open up the conversation. And then Alyssa mentioned this before, when others watch you paying attention. And I wanted to just kind of underscore watch you, because body language, again, is 58% of communication. So when people, they can tell when they're speaking and they look at you, they can tell whether you're really paying attention or not. And when they see that you really are listening, it conveys respect. It tells them that you care about them and their issues, and it just really makes things go better. And that's true for all members on the team. But really try to listen that way because it will help. Okay. Now, I've got to be honest, sometimes it's difficult to listen. Some people are difficult for us to listen to. So some of the things, I just mentioned a couple here that might make it hard to listen to another person, or a time that it might be hard for you to listen. The first one is when you feel like you've heard it all before and you think you know what's coming. I mean, maybe you've had a lot of conversations with this person. Maybe it's a member of the team. But because of that, you just aren't really open or really engaged to listen right now because you think you already know what they're going to say. And that can really hinder us. Another time is when you feel rushed and you just don't have enough time to listen. That's one of the reasons why it's so important that the IEP meeting, the agenda is set up in such a way and really thought through that there is adequate time to discuss the issues, including being able to really listen and ask questions and build understanding. But when you feel rushed and don't feel like there's enough time, it's really hard to listen. Another that's very real is when you're tired, or I should say also when you don't feel well and you just don't have the energy. One thing I need to mention here, and I know this will make sense to you, but if you're just listening to come up with the answer or listening to build your argument, that really doesn't take a lot of energy. Because like I said, confirmation bias already has us thinking in that direction and energizes us. And it just doesn't take a lot of effort or energy. But when you're listening for understanding, that does take a lot of energy. That really takes a lot of energy to listen for beyond what's just being said to maybe what the perspective is, where the person's coming from. That involves you listening, not just with your ears, but really watching the body language, just a lot of energy. And then the last thing is that it's hard to listen when you really don't like or trust the other person that's talking. And that's called reactive devaluation. And it just means that because you don't like or trust this person, when they say something, you immediately react to devalue whatever they said. And that's a really dangerous thing because the truth is they may really be saying something that you want to hear, that you could agree with, that would help you so much. But because you don't like or trust them, you basically just kind of put the cone of silence up and you don't really hear what's going on. So all of these things are real, but I just want to encourage you, just being aware of these maybe, to not let these keep you from doing the hard work, using the energy that it takes to really listen, because that listening can open up so much in terms of really building a bridge of understanding with all of the team members and then finding solutions that hopefully will lead to consensus. Okay. Just a fun little activity, and that is think of a person that's hard for you to listen to and make the choice to really listen for understanding the next time you're in a conversation with them. And you would maybe normally you just kind of passive listening, or whatever. This time you're going to really be open. You're going to listen. Do that and then watch what happens in your interaction. Do it a few times and see if that changes your interaction. I think would be a really good activity for all of us. Okay. The last part of this, a couple things to help build a more unified team perspective. So the first thing is the way you see others. And let's focus on the team. The way we see others greatly impacts the interactions we're going to have with them. And basically, I'm going to talk about two ways that we could see people. The first one is when we see others as adversaries, when we see them as on the other side from us and them, we don't typically give them a chance. and we can very easily just write them off or write off what they're saying. And then right along with that, we stop listening to them, right? Because of that reactive devaluation. They're on the other side. They're our enemy. And so we devalue what they say. And then what that means is we end up sabotaging any real possibility for collaboration. That's what happens when we see someone as an adversary. Now, go to the next. Yeah.
So I think this bears, I guess, mentioning with Alyssa talking about trust earlier, and you've mentioning the mutual respect and how we see each other, and I think where I wanted to mention, I guess, that this is hard work. I
Oh,
mean, this
yeah.
can be so hard, especially if you're in a position where the trust has been broken or that relationship is not where it should be, to not see the adversarial part, um to truly be able to listen without all the judgment and all the stuff going on in the back of your head, right? It's so hard, and you have to be introspective and think through this. It's hard and it takes effort, and I think that is worth acknowledging, right? That you can't just sit here and think, well, this is great,
Right,
and now it's going
right.
to be fixed tomorrow if there's a broken relationship
Yeah.
there between school team members. But this is possible,
It is.
especially pulling in some of these skills of how, we've talked about this in other ways too, of addressing kind of the elephant in the room and how to move forward and use those questions. But you've got to do some of these things, both parents and schools, right? To get in the mindset to be able to change your viewpoint. So I think, and these are great things. I just felt like it's
Yeah.
worth, this is hard. It's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you mentioning that. This isn't meant to be like a fantasy thing, right? This is hard work. You're absolutely right. And if we were going to drill down in it more, it's the reason it's hard if you're seeing somebody as an adversary is that you didn't just come to that conclusion. You have stories in that you've already created in which they are an adversary. And so what you're really ending up having to do in a sense is changing your stories about them. But it is possible. It is hard work. And I appreciate you mentioning that. So where trust is broken down and where we dislike people already, then we're going to really have to be self-aware and be willing to spend some real time on this. It's not going to happen instantly. Yeah. Thank you. All right, go to the next slide. We also can see others as allies. I mean, those are the two ways. Seeing people as adversaries or seeing them as allies. In other words, really, really on the team with me. And that's my hope that when we're talking about parents right now is that parents would be able to see school team members, the rest of the IEP team really as on the same team, as allies. And because when you see someone as an ally, even if you have, and by the way, you can do this when you have real differences of opinion. You still can see someone as an ally. And when you do that, you end up giving them the benefit of the doubt when there's a question, instead of writing them off. It really makes it much easier for you to be willing and open to listen to them, right? Because it's the opposite of reactive devaluation. And then the result is that opens the door to collaboration. So I love this quote here, and it kind of ties in, Allison, to what you were saying in my mind. But Wayne Dyer says, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And I think about that with people, with team members. If you change the way you look at them, they actually begin to change in the way that you're able to interact with them. And as hard as it really is, and it may really take a considerable amount of time, the good news is that you actually can make a choice. You can change the way you see others, and that can change them in terms of your relationship with them. So this thing, think about how you see others, and maybe there's some work that will need to be done here, but it really will be worth the work. Okay, let's go to the next slide. There's one more thing with this unified team perspective that I want to mention, and that is the stance, the communication stance that you have. So the stance that you take will impact your ability to collaborate with others on a team. And by the way, this isn't just true like for the IEP team. This would be true in personal relationships as well. The stance that you take is going to make a big difference. So I'm not talking here, people will have different stances on issues, right? That's kind of like perspectives. I'm not talking about your stance on an issue, but your stance toward others. So what stance, the question that each of us really, we have to ask ourselves is, what stance am I showing up with? That's what I'm really talking about, the way we show up in a conversation or the way we show up in an IEP team meeting. What kind of stance am I taking? And there's two stances that I want us to take a brief look at here that can make such a difference. We're either coming in typically with a telling stance or we're coming in with a learning stance. So let's look at the next slide and you'll be able to see how these break down. If I'm coming in with a telling stance, then this is how others are going to see me. I'm going to be approaching the conversation with the belief that I'm right and the others are wrong, and I'm coming in with that mentality. And I'm going to enter the conversation as a result to prove my point that I'm right. I'm going to be more likely to be judgmental. I might even be arrogant. And most often I'm going to be dismissive of what others have to say. It's going to be kind of ties into listening again. I'm probably going to be dismissive. All of those things are going to lead to debate. And I don't mean healthy debate. I mean, they're going to lead to the kind of debate that hinders the ability to collaborate and work together as a team. And I think the truth of the matter is I think about my life, I know I've been in conversations or in meetings where someone showed up with this telling stance. I know what it looks like. And if I'm honest, I also can know that I've showed up with a telling stance at times. And that really didn't help. Now, the stance that we really want to take is a learning stance. And basically, if I'm coming in with a learning stance that I'm approaching the conversation, or let's say the meeting, the conversation that's going to happen in the IEP team meeting, I'm approaching that as an opportunity for new learning and to build shared understanding on the team. I enter this conversation, instead of coming in to prove my point, I'm entering it with curiosity. I'm open to new things. And then I'm going to model respect for diversity of opinion, and I'm going to be present and open again for new learning. And if I'm coming in with this kind of stance, that's going to lead to dialogue where everyone is able to engage. That's going to help collaboration. If someone comes into a meeting that I'm in and they show up with that learning stance, it absolutely just invites everyone to engage and helps them collaborate. When somebody shows up, anyone with that telling stance, it's going to put others on the defensive and make it where you're not comfortable to share. So you really want to think about, even though, let's say, as we're talking about parents, but this is so true for every member of the team, but for parents, you may have a really different opinion or perspective from the school team on something. And that needs to be shared. That's important because that's part of your meaningful participation. But think about the stance that you will show up to that meeting with. Because if you bring your perspective, and you even maybe very different, if you bring that with a learning stance or posture, that's going to make a real big difference in terms of the ability of the team to be able to address that, and you'll be able to collaborate, be able to build understanding and de-escalate conflict. Or if you come in with the telling stance, it's going to escalate the conflict and cause others to be defensive. So the stance we take is really, really important. These two stances are from this book by Stone, Patton, and Heem called Difficult Conversations. It's not Crucial Conversations, but it's a great book, how to discuss what matters most, that I could recommend. But I think that stance can make a difference. Allison, did you have any thoughts on that? Do you think about and that really is my last piece here, and then I have a wrap-up slide.
No, I think the way that these things are framed are so helpful. Um, and it, like I said earlier, it takes some introspection from all parts. I don't mean just, I mean, because like you said, this is for everybody, right? Um, some introspective work on, is this how I'm approaching these conversations? Am I really listening to understand? Because yeah, if you come in with this telling stance, it's off-putting for the other people. Because, and again, it ties back to what Alyssa mentioned. Everybody has varied perspectives. The way the child behaves or functions at home is going to be different than the way they function
Right.
with the speech pathologist in the group of four versus the way they function in that science class, that gen ed setting with 26 students versus, and so those different perspectives may all be true.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that everybody else is also wrong.
Right.
So I love the framing of this, and if people will take this to heart, um, but in both
Uh,
ways, like you said, in both directions, it
yeah.
it can go really far.
Yeah.
It's all about how to move that kid forward in those different settings.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm glad you just mentioned the last thing. Even though I'm sharing this as part of how families can prepare for IEP meetings, this is true for every member of the team. We all want to be able to come in with more of a learning stance. And I've thought about this so much because I use this in other trainings, and I've thought sometimes it may be difficult. For a team member to come in and thinking about, I'm really going to be learning something new. But if you can't deal with it as a learning stance, then maybe it's a listening stance. Because at least it's still an openness. You're not there to prove that you're right. You're there to build understanding with everyone. So I think that can help us all. Okay, next slide. Just some takeaways. Come prepared. And there's some things that we talked about to do that. Be willing to collaborate. Realize that advocates can be helpful and take advantage of working with them. But parents, you are the experts on your child, so own your voice and then try to listen to understand.